Have we got a fun makeover for you? Welcome to our basement, where we have an 85-inch TV that is too big for our current TV stand. We painted it a few months ago, and I've linked that makeover in the description for you to watch. But now, with a big TV, this dresser isn't gonna work. And I've got the best idea to create a budget-friendly big TV stand that will fit under this TV. We're gonna take a few cube storage shelves, put them together, and add some extra details to make them look like a high-end TV stand for a fraction of the cost. And don't worry, we've linked all of the supplies we used in the description for you. Upstairs, we have these two modular consoles that make a really nice TV stand. I love these cabinets, but I don't want to spend $900+ for 3 more of these for our basement TV. For this project, we used a 6-cube storage shelf and 2 of the 4-cube storage shelves from Target as the base. I love the amount of storage these provide, especially since the basement is the playroom for the kids. I'm going to put baskets on these to help organize all of the kids' toys and hide the TV consoles. Assembling these shelves wasn't hard at all. It took maybe an hour for both of us, and we got to enjoy a friendly little race to see who would beat. Of course, I won. We didn't really follow the instructions, and I didn't want the outside cubes to have 4 cube slots, so we only attached the pieces that would make them have 1 shelf. And then, for the moment of truth, we moved the 3 newly built shelves together in front of the existing TV stand setup, with a longer 6-cube shelf in the middle and the 2 smaller shelves flanking the sides to catch a vision of what it was going to be like. And then we realized that we rushed the assembly process too quick while racing each other and ended up putting the shelf the wrong way, going vertical in the 4-cube shelves, so we had to partially take that back apart and fix our mistake to get the shelves in horizontally. With the TV and the green dresser out of the way, we set up our new TV stand cubes on top of some 2x4 pieces we planned to make a base with. We wanted to mock things up a bit before moving forward to make sure we like the look. We also placed some baseboards around the 2x4 base to get a feel for the new look, and we liked it. Not to mention, we used our kids' little building blocks to set under the trim, which gave us a good idea of how much we needed to rip off of the 2x4 boards for the base and the baseboard to line up correctly. It was the perfect size, actually. And then it was time to get the saws out and start the build. We used the table saw to rip the 2x4s down about 1 1/8 inches. We wanted the baseboard to cover the 2x4s and most of the bottom of the shelves when all was said and done. Then we used our miter saw to cut those 2x4s into the right lengths for the base. We made 4 boxes that were the same size of the shelves. Before we put the base together and while the saws were still out, we cut the wood for the top of the TV stand. We wanted to give this TV stand a little bit of a rustic look with the old wood that a friend in Minnesota ripped out of their basement walls. So we ripped them down to the right width on the table saw, but after cutting all this wood down and trying to lay it out on the top of the dresser, we realized it was way too warped and was going to be a pain to deal with. So we scratched that idea and went with Plan B. Plan B was to use 1x pine wood boards from the local hardware store. We ripped them down to about 7 inches for the front and 8 inches for the back boards. That's just how it worked out, so we didn't have to buy more expensive, wider boards for the whole entire top. I don't mind the back boards being a little bit wider than the front. And we wanted to have about a 3/4 inch overhang on the front and sides and have them flush with the back of the shelves. After ripping the pine boards, we laid them on top of the TV stand to see where and in which direction we wanted the boards to be. And then we measured how much we needed to cut the boards to keep a 3/4 inch overhang on both sides. I didn't want the seams to line up, so similar to creating a wood floor pattern, I cut the back boards into 3 pieces and the front boards into only 2 pieces. We made 1 cut at a time, putting the boards back on the top each time and measuring for the next cut to make sure we got everything lined up just right. It kind of felt like putting a puzzle together. When we got all the cuts to the right length and our puzzle was complete, I gave them a good sanding with 220 grit sandpaper and my Surf Prep sander to smooth out any rough areas and slightly around the edges. Then we set those boards aside and moved on to putting together the base. We drilled pocket holes into the 2x4s with our Craig jig. These holes will make it possible to attach the base to the bottom of the shelves without any nails or screws showing. We also pre-drilled holes on the end of the longer pieces that would go on the front and the back. Then we put the bases together using a square to keep things square and use screws to attach the base together in the corners. We flipped the first section of the TV stand upside down and placed our newly built base onto it. Then we used clamps to hold the base where we wanted it to be and drilled the 2-inch Craig screws into the pocket holes to attach the base to the bottom of the cube shelves. We repeated this process to attach the remaining 2 bases to the other cube shelves. We flipped them back over onto the base to make sure they worked. And then Taylor moved them back downstairs for the next step of putting everything together. We laid the 3 pieces on their backs and lined up the bases as much as possible. We even used a few clamps to try and keep the seam between the 2 shelves as tight as we could while we connected the bases together. We used 2.5-inch screws to attach the bases to each other and turn these 3 separate pieces into one giant TV stand. We also put a couple of screws into the MDF to try and attach the pieces together, but there really isn't much material there in these shelves for the screws to grab, so it's a good thing that we attach them really well into the 2x4 bases. And then we lifted the TV stand back upright very carefully since it was only connected well at the bottom at the bases. We removed the clamps at the bottom and moved them closer to the top to try to pull the pieces together as tightly as we could. Then we laid the wood boards how we wanted them on the top. We moved the wood pieces around a few times until we got them just right where we wanted them, and used a scrap piece of 3/4 inch wood to get the edges flush with an overhang of 3/4 inches on the fronts and the sides. There was a gap in some areas where the wood boards rested on the top, so I used some popsicle sticks as shims to try and fill in the gaps before we nailed the boards on. But let's be honest, that didn't really work. But oh well. Then I used my air compressor and pneumatic nail gun to attach the wood boards onto the top of our TV stand. Our TV stand was really starting to take shape and we were starting to get really excited about it. But we still had quite a few finishing touches to work on. So we went back outside to work on cutting the baseboard that we wanted to use as a nice trim around the bottom to cover up that ugly 2x4 base. Mitering the trim at the right angles is always a little tricky at first, and it took us a minute to make sure we had the saw blade at the right 45-degree angle and going in the right direction, but eventually we got it all figured out and made the first cut. We ran back downstairs to check our cut, measure for the next cut, and then ran back out to the garage to cut the other end at the right length and the right angle. We did this process several times until we had all of the baseboard cut to the angles and the length that we needed. The nice thing about this baseboard is that it came already primed from the store, so at least we didn't have to prime it. But we did need to paint it, and I wanted it to match the same white color as the rest of the TV stand. So I took one of the white cube shelves to Home Depot and asked them to color match it in this Bear Dynasty paint. I used one of my favorite paintbrushes, this zebra round paintbrush, to get the paint onto the baseboard and then use the mohair roller to roll out the brush marks. But when it was dry and I was excited to attach the baseboards, I put a board up next to the TV stand and was sorely disappointed. The color matched paint was too bright of a white compared to the TV stand that looked like it was slightly gray. So I did what first came to mind and I mixed up a little bit of this General Finishes Seagull Gray paint in with my color matched Bear paint. And thankfully, when the stir stick was dry, the new color matched much better. So I painted the new paint color on the baseboard and let the paint dry. While I was painting the baseboard, Taylor quickly sanded a few spots on the top where the wood planks were a little bit uneven. Then he wiped off all of the sanding dust with a tack cloth and got the top ready for me to stain. I taped off the edges of the TV stand under the top to prevent stain from getting onto the white part, and I brushed this Bear water-based wood stain in the color Special Walnut onto the top of the TV stand. I love being able to use water-based stain inside. It dries so fast and it doesn't stink like oil-based stain. That's a major win-win here. But as it dried, I started to worry that the color wasn't exactly right for this room yet. I'll get back to that in the next coat. By now the paint was dry on the baseboard, so we went ahead and attached it around the base of the TV stand with the nail gun. And let's just say this was an aggravating process. It was such a pain getting the baseboard to be level, while also trying to line them up well with each piece. But after some frustration, we worked through it and just did the best we could, and I think it actually looks pretty good. So I quickly filled the nail holes in the baseboard with some wood filler and taped off the edges above the baseboard to prevent the next few steps from getting on the TV stand. I sanded the excess wood filler down with 220 grit sandpaper, and while I was at it, I also lightly sanded the rest of the baseboards to smooth out the paint. I wiped off the dust with tack cloth and then brushed and rolled the gray paint all over, except for the very top lip of the baseboard that I never patched or sanded. I didn't want to accidentally get this paint on the TV stand. Even though I had tape, it wasn't that great of a tape job. Some people, including my husband, might say that I was a little bit excessive in repainting the baseboards for just that slight color difference, but to me, it was totally worth the hassle. It looks so much better to me now. All right, so remember how I didn't care for the color of the wood stain on the top? Well, it couldn't have been easy, of course. And when I came back to look at the top, it was still just not the right color for me. There was too much of an orange-red hue to it that did not go well with the baskets I planned to use on this piece. So I mixed in a little bit of the green fusion mineral paint called Bayberry into the stain. It ended up being about 25 to 75% ratio mix of a little bit of the green paint to the stain. I wiped the new stain and the paint mixture onto one wood plank first just to make sure that I liked it, and I loved it. It was so much better. The green paint knocked out the red tone from the wood and made the stain much darker. It was exactly what I was looking for in this room. With the stain all figured out for the top of this piece, we could move on to our next issue. That big, nice gap between the top and the TV stand. But luckily, we had a pretty easy fix for this. We found this small piece of trim that fit right under the overhang of the wood top and was the perfect shape to hide the gap and give the top a very nice finishing touch. So Taylor measured the length of the sides and the front and went out to the garage to make the cuts and to practice getting the miter angle right for the corners. He decided he needed a little help making sure he cut the trim at the right angle. He didn't want to mess it up. And since we didn't have much excess wood to spare on this piece, I figured I would come out to supervise him a little. But we ended up getting the trim cut at 45-degree mitered angles. We wiped some stain onto the trim pieces using the same green paint and stain mixture that we had used on the top. When the stain was dry, we got out our handy dandy nail gun and attached the small trim pieces under the top of the TV stand. We did have to run back and make one more small cut for one of the pieces that was still a little bit too long, but in the end we got them all attached and it looked so good. Now it's time to fix the other gap. See this gap down here between the baseboard and the TV stand? I used this clear paintable caulking and filled in the gap as much as I could. When the caulking was dry enough, I removed the painter's tape and let it dry all of the way. We're almost there, but I had to protect the stain and paint from getting damaged. Using a foam sponge, I wiped on 3 coats of water-based polyurethane in semi-gloss sheen to the wood top. I also used this mini zebra paintbrush to brush the poly on the tiny trim under the wood top. This little brush is so handy to get the poly in tight spaces like this without getting it on the shelves. Okay, so we are finally almost done with this massive project, I promise. We just have one more finishing touch to add with these little white stickers. There were a bunch of screw holes in the laminate shelves that we wanted to cover up, so we just stuck these little stickers over all the holes, and now we can finally consider this project done. All right, remember, here's what it looked like before. This big TV sitting on a much too small TV stand, and then just the cube shelves alone were boring and cheap looking. And here's what it looks like now. Oh, doesn't it look so good? That was such a big project, but I am so happy with how well it turned out in the end, and I love that it didn't cost an arm and a leg either. And it's so cool to be able to say, I made that. When all is said and done, the final cost of this project came to about $450, compared to the more than $900 I was going to spend on something else. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons to see more of our videos. You'll never know what other DIY project we'll do next. Are you confused and not sure where to start with your furniture makeover? Don't worry, I got your back. Click the link in my comment to download our free painting checklist so you can paint your furniture as if you hired a professional to do it.